Welcome to Learning to Lead, a podcast about leadership, teamwork, and reimagining healthcare. This podcast is for learners, educators, and healthcare professionals interested in building leadership skills in a supportive community. We are your hosts,
Rahul Anand,
Maya Doyle,
Peter Longley,
and Brooklyn Weber. Together, we bring you conversations with emerging and established leaders, deep dives, and hacks to help you become the best leader you can be.
Today we're going to talk about how to tell better stories. I'm your host Rahul. With me today are our co-hosts Maya.
Hello.
Pete.
Hello, everyone.
And our newly minted third-year medical student, Brooke.
Hi, everyone.
With us today is Dr. Rebecca Zucconi. Rebecca is an OBGYN trained physician and award-winning educator at the Netter School of Medicine. She attended medical school at SUNY Syracuse and completed her residency training at Long Island Jewish Medical Center. We fondly call her our Chief Storytelling Officer, and Rebecca has taught many how to craft and tell better stories so that they're clear, engaging, and effective. Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be here.
Shall we get started?
Started.
To begin with, what is a story and what's not a story, just an anecdote?
So I like to think of an anecdote as a way of transferring information, and that's fine. What's different about a story, I think, is that it's more of a process. A story is intentional. A story is a way for us to process our experience into meaning, and it's a way of communicating to an audience, and we can bring our audience into that experience and maybe even show them meaning as well.
So it's intentional, it's drawing in the audience, and it's making meaning for them. What are the key beats or elements that make up a story then?
So I think when we think of storytelling, there's a lot of different frameworks that we can draw from. One of the frameworks that you and I have been working with recently comes from Marshall Gantt's work in narrative leadership, and this is the story of self. And this is a way of communicating values to an audience and developing shared values with an audience. And through this framework, it's really simple. It's a challenge, choice, and outcome framework. So we, of course, have setting, we have our characters, and we set up our characters in a challenge. And the challenge brings us to a moment of choice. The choice is where everything happens, everything changes, and the outcome is, the vision of the future that's different because of that choice. So it's a really simple framework. You can tell a story with this framework in only a few minutes, but there are certainly other frameworks that you can use. And I think one of them is the STAR story toolkit that you've been working with your fourth year students. And, that's another model.
So it's about the character and the setting, a challenge faced by the character, a choice that is there in the moment that they have to make, and whatever outcome that happens as a result of that choice.
Yeah, that's right. And I think very often the outcome that we see is different and maybe even completely the opposite of where we began at the initiation of the challenge.
I can see how that would be very engaging because it's totally unexpected, that element of surprise. So to illustrate this, would you be able to share a story with us?
Sure, I can share a story. This is a personal story. So I'm a junior faculty member at a new medical school, and I'm developing a curriculum for medical students in self-care. And I stumble into this new field of medicine that focuses on 6 core pillars for health promotion, and it's lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine targets disease prevention through nutrition, movement, sleep, stress reduction, social connections, and the avoidance of harmful substances. And this really resonates with me because I believe in these pillars, and I know I can teach my students these pillars, but I begin to have some doubts about whether I'm also leading by example. And in my life, some lifestyle choices have come easy to me. I've followed a plant-based diet since I was in my 20s, but other choices have been hard. And even though I've always considered myself a runner, the reality is with the stress and the exhaustion of running a busy household, prioritizing physical activity at the end of the day feels impossible. So in my head, I think I'm a runner, but I'm just so tired. And I'm living with this tension of knowing what I want, but not seeing a way to get there. And then one day the invitation comes, and it comes from a friend who invites me to join her on a morning run at 5 a.m. And it's winter. I tell her it's winter, it's dark, it's cold. And she says, just show up. And so the night before, I lay out my clothes, I set my alarm, I sleep fitfully, but I get up. And even as I'm stepping outside into the cold air, I'm thinking, this is crazy. But unexpectedly, that crisp morning air felt invigorating, and the conversation flowed very easily, and the pace felt relaxed. I got home before anyone else in my household had stirred, and my morning coffee had never tasted better. And so I showed up to morning run the next week. And years later, I am still showing up, and my morning run has become my lifestyle choice. And I feel really fortunate to have found this practice that checks so many of my boxes, because it's not just about physical activity anymore. It's about the social connection. It's about the fresh air. It's about stress reduction. It's about feeling in control of something every single day. And it's about the restorative sleep that follows that. But that transformation for me began on the first morning that I decided to step out and to show up. And that's the story of my morning run.
I love that story, Rebecca. I have a question. Can I ask a question? So, when you're thinking about using stories, obviously you were using a story to tell us about how you changed your routine and how wonderful it's been for you. Where do you stop telling the story and let others kind of reflect on the lesson? Or do you tell the story and share sort of, oh, this is what I learned, or this is the outcome? That's the piece I'm always curious about when we're thinking about how we're using that story to teach and lead other folks.
Yeah,
Right?
I work with students a lot in writing personal statements, and I think story writing is really effective in writing a personal statement. Brooke. So, and I always emphasize with them, you want to show, not tell. You want to respect the intelligence of your audience. You want them to be able to draw their own conclusions from what you're presenting to them. It's an offering that you're making, but what they take away from it is theirs. And you can craft your story in a way that sort of has, backward design to it, so that you know the message that you want to deliver. But really, it's up to the audience to receive it in the way that they're going to receive it.
Yeah, thanks. I have a story that I'm wrestling with how to tell and figuring out, right, how far and what to give away and what to share when it's still being crafted in that way, kind of because, right, I don't want to give away the stuff that I want my audience to think about.
Right, exactly. And it's more interesting when they feel more part of your story when they're doing the thinking for themselves and it's not just being delivered.
I have a question, Rebecca. I guess environment or context of when to deliver a story, because I keep going back to when I worked in the hospitals. I would do financial plans that I had to kind of sell to the finance department. And sometimes I would start with the end and be like, I could make you millions of dollars, or this plan can make you millions of dollars, and then spoon feed it to them. But then there's times I spoon fed it, and then I would end up, and this is what the outcome could be. So I'm just curious on any of your experience with that.
Well, I think what you're describing is sort of is like the hook. What you just described sounds like a great hook to get the attention and keep the attention of your audience. And I think that type of lead-in can be really effective. And this is something, again, that when I'm working with students who are writing a personal statement for their residency applications, you get one chance with program directors reading your essay. And so that hook is really, really important. And so I think, understanding your audience, understanding, again, what's the message that you want to leave with your audience, will, help you to decide how to deliver your message, how to tell your story.
Can I just add to that, Pete? We have this conversation in social work a lot too with our students, where they're learning about advocacy and they're doing grant writing and they're doing things like that. And we kind of talk about, like, how do you want to win an argument or win someone over? And it's like story and data, and what direction you present those in, or how you interweave them, so that, right, you can kind of get someone on your side and willing to, and feeling like empathetic, like, oh, this is something I want to invest in or support, or a change I want to invest in or support.
And what I'm picking up from this conversation is that you have to know your audience, and there are situations where you may need data, and there are situations where you lead with the story.
Also, we have to think about when we use story, like as leaders or as clinicians, like when it's important to share, oh, like this is something that I experienced, or this is something that I've seen, in order to kind of ease the way for someone. And sometimes that's useful and necessary, and sometimes it's not. Like sometimes we just need to present the information and let them process it. And I don't know, and it may be the psychosocial part of my training, but like I always feel the need to, right, kind of pat it and say, well, other people have gone through this, or this is what I've seen. And sometimes that's not necessary. So it's interesting to think about, like, when is that helpful and when do you have to let them write the story versus us kind of helping it along.
Yeah, and I think, your story can inspire, and you want to be inspiring, but you don't want to, force too much pressure on someone to act on your message.
Let's talk about where we do use storytelling in our work.
I think when teaching and you're teaching a complex concept, I give them stories from my experience so they can hold on to, so it sticks, right? So they can hold on to whatever I'm trying to teach, and they appreciate it because they come back later and be like, tell us another story about X, Y, and Z. So that's what I try to do, instead of giving them all the abstract concepts and all the variables. I give them a little bit and then give them a story to, I guess, hook them into learning a little bit more. And they intuitively keep that.
So they're engaging and they're sticky. They really stay with them.
I would toss this back to Brooke. Like, Brooke, do you find that closest to our student? How do you find it useful as a student, being the closest to the student role right now? How is it useful for you if you have a faculty member who does something?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Pete's saying. I think that it is more useful because, like what Dr. Anand just said, it's easier to remember, and it's like more sticky because it feels more like personal, sort of. I feel like stories are kind of like personal, and so it like makes the information more relatable versus you just like throwing facts at somebody. It's like, okay, but when there's like a story attached, it's easier to remember. And then I was also just thinking that another time when I think that we use stories is when we're talking about ourselves. So I think that that's why like the personal statement's a great example. And also because when you tell a story about yourself, it's easier, or people can see the traits that you want to portray versus when I just tell you like that I'm honest or I'm determined, it's not really as believable as when I put it in a story. So I think that like what Dr. Zucconi was saying about the showing and not just telling. So when you talk about yourself, I think is a time when stories are really important.
I agree with Brooke there. I recently had to interview for a position, and so I was trying to go in armed with 4 or 5 stories, anticipating questions that they will ask. And then I had the other experience of being in an interview panel for somebody else. And this was one of the comments that came for a candidate, that their application was not convincing. It was maybe AI written, maybe fluff, because while they had mentioned qualities, they had not really illustrated that with any specific stories or data. So what we're trying to do with our 4th year students is we're trying to give them some prompts to try to collect and curate some stories related to things they may get asked about, stories about tell me about a time when you had to lead a team or step up as a team member or deal with conflict or deal with failure, things like that. What are stories not to tell ourselves or when not to use story?
What's coming up for me is you don't want to tell a story in any kind of emergent need. You need to give directives and tell people what to do. That's what's coming up for me. Like when I was in the ICU and I had preceptees with me, it's not like I would tell them like, well, okay, we got to take care of Pete. He's in the bed because of this. If I'm bleeding out, I'm just gonna be like, all right, stop that, do this, and give more directives. So I guess there is probably not the best time to tell about stories. Maybe after.
What's coming up for me is I think when we don't have like a full story, like we don't actually know the story, so or we have like gaps in our knowledge, we start to make up stories. So I think a time when not to tell yourself a story is when you don't actually have like all the facts and evidence of something. Like for example, what I'm thinking about is when maybe like someone like wasn't the nicest to you, and then you start to think like, oh, maybe it's because of me, maybe I did something, but then maybe it really was just like that they were having a bad day. But because you don't like know, you start to like tell yourself these stories that aren't true.
That kind of goes through that stay on your side of the net stuff that we've talked about from the Connect book a lot of times, right? Like not making those assumptions about what someone's, like you said, what someone else's story is.
Yeah, and staying in your lane,
Yeah.
and, don't tell a story that you don't have authority to tell.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I think you have to really be thoughtful about your audience too, and that the story feel relevant to them. Like there are plenty of stories that I can tell that are sometimes they feel dated, right? There's things that happened early in my social work career that I still think were really fascinating and amazing, but they happened in, I don't know, 1995. And a lot of things have changed since 1995, right? In terms of our healthcare system, in terms of the health issues that people are confronting. So I have to think about, like, if I'm going to tell the story, how do I put it in a context that will be useful for my audience who maybe weren't even born in 1995, or were little babies in 1995. So it's a very different, right? Their view of the world is different than what my view of the world might be. So I think there's something to be said. I mean, I think Rebecca, you said this earlier, like really being aware of your audience.
I think
You have a
that's
mixed
just what I
audience.
was thinking. Know your audience, respect your audience.
So, to tie up this conversation, Rebecca, what are the top 3 ingredients in a good story, in your opinion?
So I think after you've decided on a framework, one thing that's essential is to just be relatable. Use your authentic voice, understand yourself, and understand your audience. You don't want to have to prove your own credibility when you're the storyteller. So just be relatable. Another I think tip would be to really, again, think about what your themes are and distill the themes. Know what the message is that you hope to convey. Use backward design again if that works for you, and let the audience draw their own conclusions. Show them, don't tell them. Sometimes when we're editing the stories, the hardest part of the editing process is deciding what to take out. And what's left behind is really that distillation of your core themes. And I think, Maya, you said just keep it relevant. You want to invite your audience to experience your story with you. A really nice way to do that is to tell it in the present tense. This really just promotes a sense of urgency and of intrigue. The audience is feeling the suspense of the story with you, and you're really developing that emotional response that you can only elicit from a story, not so much with an anecdote.
So, be authentic and relatable with your audience. Be clear and organized using the structure, and then know what you're trying to convey to your audience and focus on that. Are there any other top tips that folks would add?
I guess I have another question for Rebecca, a little bit about telling stories that we've written and crafted and kind of developed versus being able to kind of tell a story on the fly when a moment arises. right? And how, what are the differences, I guess, between those two things?
I think a very well-crafted story. Again, maybe in a more high-stakes situation, you want to be very clear with your words. You want to be very clear with your timing, with your delivery. But I think stories in a sort of impromptu moment can be really effective at just letting someone see that you see them and you share a little bit with them. Like, I see you, I understand you, and this is how I'm showing you that I understand because I'm giving you this piece of my history.
Right.
And you can take
Yeah.
it and you can see it for yourself. So I think we could use the same techniques for variety of purposes and in all sorts of different settings.
Thanks. Yeah. Thinking about the ways to, diffuse moments of tension or moments of conflict with stories sometimes is appropriate. And
Sometimes, yeah, and I'm thinking
sometimes even, and right to what Pete said earlier, right? In a moment of crisis, that's not the time. But
exactly.
maybe in a moment of like, okay, we're struggling, we're trying to figure out what decisions to make, what direction to go. We have a little bit of time to talk. That can be a useful time to, build a parallel.
Before we end, Rebecca, if there is one message you hope listeners take away, what would it be?
I guess it would be to step out and to show up, to be brave and tell more stories because it could be transformative for you.
I appreciate that. It does take bravery, especially when you're learning the craft, and it can make a difference, certainly, given how sticky and relatable they are. Pete, Maya, Brooke, what are you taking away?
I think what I'm taking away is being authentic and maybe being a little vulnerable with your audience. I guess where my struggle is how vulnerable, you don't want to make the audience uncomfortable, kind of. Where's that line?
And you don't want to make yourself uncomfortable either. You don't want to feel pressured into sharing something that you want to also keep personal.
I remember having someone who was a leader in my world who shared some stories about how she was very socially uncomfortable in a lot of situations. And it was very genuine, and she was trying to be vulnerable and I think build empathy. But honestly, it was too much to repeat as you're talking about. And it made us all sort of go, but wait, but we want to rely on you as a leader. We don't want to know how uncomfortable you are. Like, that wasn't the right moment for that story. And it really made a difference in then how we responded to her moving forward.
Yeah, what I would add is that they have to be context appropriate. If they're context inappropriate, then A, you can be very uncomfortable, and B, they can be seen as manipulative. So they definitely have to be about the audience and not about you, and context appropriate. What might be very appropriate with a colleague is going to be completely inappropriate with a patient. And so understanding that context is really important.
I think the other thing that I'm taking away that Rebecca, you spoke about, and Brooke, so did you, was the idea of show it, don't tell it. And I suspect I have a tendency to say it and then explain it. And to be able to like step back, take a beat, and then let the audience respond. And then if they want the lesson from me, great. But to let them come to their own conclusions. Okay. And I feel like that's a lesson I learn over and over again as I teach. So see, I just explained it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I was going to say the same thing. I would say the reminder of the importance of showing and not telling when you're telling stories.
Fantastic. And what I'm taking away is that it is a craft which takes a little bit of bravery to refine. So you have to use the method and use stories when your audience is going to be helped by them, and just keep learning and keep building. Thank you, listeners. Until next time, keep learning and leading.